It was the sound of his 5-year-old daughter crying in the dark that had Hudson Walker fumbling for the flashlight he kept in the kitchen drawer, cursing under his breath while the storm howled outside. "Elodie, sweetheart, I'm right here," he called out, flicking the flashlight on just in time to see her round the corner from the hallway, blanket in hand and tears on her cheeks. She ran straight into his arms. "Daddy, the lights went out again." "I know, baby. It's just the storm. Nothing's gonna happen, okay? I've got you." He kissed the top of her head, holding her close. The power outage wasn't surprising. His old duplex lost electricity every time the wind got too rowdy. What was surprising was the knock on the door that came 5 minutes later. Hudson froze. No one ever knocked on his door during a storm like this. He stood, flashlight beam aimed at the front door. Elodie clutched his hoodie, her big brown eyes wide. "Stay behind me," he whispered, stepping carefully toward the door. He opened it slowly, squinting into the downpour, and there she was. A woman, soaked to the bone, standing in the glow of his porch light like a ghost from some other world. She wore heels in a storm and a silk blouse that clung to her skin like it had no business being out in the rain. Her dark blonde hair was plastered to her cheeks, and her lips trembled, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "I'm sorry, I didn't know where else to go. My car broke down just up the road, no cell signal, my phone's dead." Hudson blinked. This couldn't be real. "Can I come in?" she asked, voice softer now. "Please." He didn't hesitate. Yeah, of course." He stepped aside, motioning her inside. She stepped in, dripping onto his worn-out rug, hugging herself. Elodie peeked out from behind Hudson's leg. The woman smiled, kneeling down slightly. "Hi there, I'm sorry if it scared you." Elodie didn't answer, just clung tighter to Hudson. "Come on," Hudson said, guiding her toward the couch. "You're soaked. Sit down, I'll get you a towel." She nodded, glancing around. "Thank you. I wasn't sure anyone lived out this far." "I do," he said from the hallway, grabbing one of the few clean towels he had. "Unfortunately." When he came back and handed it to her, their fingers brushed, and she looked up at him, really looked. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, but tired, like she carried a world of stress behind them. "I'm Hudson," he said carefully, "and this little one is my daughter, Elodie." "Georgia," she replied, wrapping the towel around her shoulders. "Georgia Whitmore." He raised an eyebrow. "You're not from around here, are you?" She hesitated. "No, just passing through. I was on my way to a meeting in the city. Took a wrong turn before the storm hit and ended up on a back road." Hudson nodded slowly. "Well, you're lucky you knocked on the right door. Not much help out here after dark." "No kidding," she muttered, rubbing her arms. Elodie looked up at her. "Are you hungry?" Georgia blinked. "Oh, honestly, yes. Haven't eaten since lunch." Hudson gave a weak chuckle. "We were just about to heat up some leftover spaghetti. If you don't mind microwave food, well, I guess that's out now. No power." Georgia smiled. "Cold spaghetti sounds like heaven right now." They sat at the small kitchen table, passing around plates of cold noodles by flashlight. It was ridiculous, and somehow, kind of perfect. "So," Georgia said after a few bites, "what do you do, Hudson?" He didn't flinch, but he hated this question. "I'm a mechanic. Run a small shop out in town. It's not much, but it pays the bills, most months." "And your wife?" she asked gently. "Gone," he said. 3 years now, it's just me and Elodie." George's hand hovered near her fork. "I'm sorry." "Yeah," he said quietly. "Me too." They ate in silence for a bit, the occasional flash of lightning lighting up the room. After dinner, Hudson set up a blanket on the couch for Georgia. "It's not a hotel," he said, "but it's dry." She looked up at him, eyes softer now. "You're being really kind, thank you." He shrugged. "Storms don't care who you are, we all get wet the same." She watched him for a beat longer than necessary. "Still," she said, "you didn't have to help me, you don't even know me." Hudson nodded. "You didn't have to trust me either, but here we are." That night, after he'd gotten Elodie back to sleep in her room and checked the flashlight batteries one more time, he walked past the living room and paused. Georgia was lying there, facing the ceiling, her eyes open. "You okay?" he asked. She turned her head toward him. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" She hesitated. "How strange it is. You think you have your whole life figured out. A plan, and then one wrong turn and a thunderstorm puts you in the home of a stranger, eating cold spaghetti with a little girl who offers you her last juice box without blinking." Hudson leaned against the wall. "Yeah, life's weird like that." She sat up then, wrapping the blanket around her. "You're a good dad." He smiled just a little. "I try." "Not everyone would have opened their door," she said. "Thank you for being the kind of man who did." Hudson looked at her for a long moment. The storm raged outside, but in here somehow it felt quiet. "You should get some rest," he said finally. Georgia nodded. "Good night, Hudson." "Night, Georgia." He walked back to his room, but he couldn't sleep. Not because of the storm, but because of her. He didn't know anything about her. And what he didn't know was that Georgia Whitmore wasn't just lost. She was a CEO. A billionaire. And she'd just fallen asleep in the home of a man who had no idea who she really was, or how hard she was about to fall. The next morning broke with a thin gray light bleeding through the cloud cover. The power hadn't returned, but the storm had passed, leaving behind soaked roads and branches scattered across the gravel driveway. Georgia stirred on the couch, blinking awake as the scent of something warm drifted in from the kitchen. Hudson was at the stove, quietly flipping something in a skillet over the gas burner. He hadn't noticed her yet, his focus on the pan. She stretched slowly, muscles stiff from the night on the couch. Her clothes were still damp around the edges, and her hair hung in waves, heavier than usual without her usual products or tools. She stepped into the kitchen, arms crossed. "You cook even when the power's out." He turned his head, surprised but not startled. "Gas still works. Figured I'd make something hot. There's coffee too, well, cowboy coffee, not exactly gourmet." Georgia let out a soft breath. "Honestly, that sounds perfect." He motioned toward the chipped mug sitting on the counter. "Help yourself. Careful, it bites." She poured a cup, ignoring the slight grit at the bottom. It was strong and bitter, but blessedly warm. "Do you always cook breakfast for guests who show up in the middle of a thunderstorm, or am I special?" Hudson glanced at her, one brow raised. "Special might be a stretch, but I figured you didn't come with breakfast in your purse." Georgia leaned against the counter, watching him flip the eggs. "You're not what I expected." "Expected what?" "I don't know," she said, swirling her coffee. "Someone less, steady maybe. You've got a calm vibe, like nothing shakes you." He gave a dry laugh. "You haven't seen me try to file taxes." She smiled, but her gaze lingered on him. "Still, you're composed, that's rare." He plated the eggs and slid her one, then made a second plate for himself. Elodie appeared a moment later, rubbing her eyes and dragging a stuffed rabbit by one ear. She climbed into the chair beside Georgia without hesitation. "Morning," Georgia said, surprised. Elodie mumbled something close to a greeting, then reached for the toast. Hudson passed her a fork. "She's not a morning person." "She's got good taste, then," Georgia murmured. They ate in relative quiet, the kind that settles in after a shared storm. Outside, birds chirped timidly between the dripping trees. Georgia watched the window, her thoughts far away. "Do you need help getting your car towed?" Hudson asked after a moment. "I've got a buddy at the shop who can come out with me. We've got a winch." She looked at him, startled by the offer. "You do that?" "Sure, you still need to get to the city, right?" She hesitated. "I had a meeting scheduled for this morning. It's probably already too late." "You could reschedule." "Not really," she said, sipping her coffee. "It wasn't that kind of meeting." Hudson didn't pry, but his curiosity stirred. Georgia's expression had shifted something guarded now, like she'd accidentally revealed too much. He stood collecting plates. "Well, if the car's still there, we'll get it out. Do you remember the street?" "About 2 miles back, near a rusted sign that said no outlet. Pulled over when the engine started smoking." "Got it, I'll grab my tools. You and Elodie hold down the fort." Georgia glanced at Elodie, who was methodically stacking toast crusts. "We'll manage." Hudson left, grabbing his jacket and heading outside. The door shut behind him with a dull thud. Georgia turned to Elodie, who was now drawing something on a napkin with a stubby crayon. "What are you making?" she asked. "A unicorn," Elodie said without looking up. Georgia tilted her head. "Looks like it has wings." "It's a unicorn Pegasus. They're rarer." "Of course," Georgia said with a nod. "Silly me." Elodie paused, studying her. "Are you a princess?" Georgia blinked. "What?" "You talk like one. Fancy." Georgia let out a soft laugh. "No, not a princess." "But you look like one." Georgia's smile faltered for half a second. "Thanks, I think." "Do you have a job?" Elodie asked, still drawing. "Yes, I'm the boss of a big company." "Like Daddy's boss." Biting back a grin, Georgia shook her head. "Bigger." Elodie's eyes went wide. "Like the biggest boss." Georgia leaned in. "Don't tell anyone." Elodie zipped her lips. "Secret." Hudson returned an hour later, damp from the wet branches but grinning as he stepped inside. "Your car's toast," he said, wiping his hands. "Water got into the engine. We'll need to tow it into town. That'll take a couple of hours." Georgia nodded slowly, her mind already turning. "Is there a place in town where I can make a few calls?" "There's a diner with a landline. Power's out there too, but they've got a generator." "Can you take me?" "Sure," he said. "Elodie can stay with Mrs. Connor's next door. She watches her sometimes when I'm working late." Georgia looked unsure. "I don't want to impose." Hudson rubbed the back of his neck. "You're not. Besides, she'll talk your ear off if you let her. Might be good for you." She lifted an eyebrow. "You think I need to be talked at?" "I think you've been holding something in since you stepped through that door," he said simply. She stared at him, surprised by the accuracy. "I'll get the truck," he added, already heading back out the door. Georgia watched him go, then looked down at her crumpled clothes and damp heels. Nothing about this was part of her plan, and yet, for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like she was drowning in expectations. Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds. And for reasons she couldn't quite explain, Georgia Whitmore, billionaire, CEO, boardroom shark, and woman who hadn't trusted anyone in years, followed Hudson Walker toward a beat-up pickup truck like it was the most natural thing in the world. The diner sat at the edge of town like it had been dropped there by accident. Faded yellow siding, a flickering neon sign that read Millie's, and a front window fogged with condensation from the generator-powered coffee machines inside. Hudson pulled the truck into the gravel lot and killed the engine. "You sure they've got a phone?" Georgia asked, eyeing the place like it might collapse with a strong breeze. "They've got a rotary one behind the counter. You'll have to explain to Millie how to hang up for you." Georgia gave him a sidelong glance. "That's oddly specific." She once left a call connected for 6 hours because she thought the phone had to cool down. He opened the door and stepped out into the damp morning air. Georgia followed, her heels clicking against the gravel in small, sharp notes. She paused before going inside. "Thank you for driving me." Hudson shrugged. "Only fair, you're stranded in my town, remember?" Inside, Millie's smelled like bacon grease and overbrewed coffee. A few locals sat hunched over plates of eggs and hash, their conversations low and slow. A man in a flannel nodded at Hudson. Georgia felt the weight of eyes shift toward her as she entered. "You're new," one woman said from a booth near the door, eyeing Georgia's blouse with open curiosity. "Lost, I assume." "Temporarily," Georgia replied, moving toward the counter. Hudson greeted Millie, a woman in her 70s with a head of stiff curls and a voice like gravel. "Got a visitor needs to make a call, Millie." Millie peered over her glasses. "You bring in city women around now, Hudson." She brought herself. Millie grunted and pointed to the phone on the wall behind her. "You get 3 minutes. Generator's fussy." Georgia stepped behind the counter, picked up the receiver, and began dialing from memory. Hudson drifted toward a corner booth and sat down, watching her as she spoke in low tones, her back to the room. He knew a woman like her didn't just drive into nowhere without a reason. Something had brought her here, not just the storm, and whatever it wasn't something she was ready to explain. Georgia hung up and turned around, her face unreadable as she walked to the booth and slipped into the seat across from him. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Yes, I moved a few things around." He raised an eyebrow. "That sounded like you were barking orders at someone." "I was," she said simply. "Sometimes it's the only language people understand." "You're intense when you work." She folded her hands on the table. "You have no idea." "Try me." Georgia studied him. 5 years ago, I pitched a business model to a room full of investors who had already decided I was just a pretty face. I signed 2 of them before the meeting ended. Now, oversee 17 departments, negotiate contracts in 3 languages, and fire people who call me sweetheart in boardrooms. Hudson didn't flinch. "So what are you doing here?" She hesitated, eyes narrowing slightly. "I was on my way to a merger meeting, one that could have tripled our valuation." "Could have." "I called it off." He leaned forward. "Because of your car." "No," she said, her voice quieter now. "Because I wasn't sure I wanted to close it." Hudson tilted his head. "Why?" She didn't answer right away. "The company we're absorbing is run by a family, small, local. They'd lose everything if I went through with it." He stared at her. "So don't." Georgia looked away. "It's not that simple. We've spent 3 months arranging the buyout. Shareholders expect returns. If I walk away, I take the hit publicly." "Maybe it's worth it," he said. "Maybe not everything's about growth." "You sound like my father," she muttered. "Was he wrong?" She looked out the window for a long moment. "No, just inconvenient." They sat in silence for a beat before she changed the subject. "You don't talk much about yourself." "I've got nothing shiny to show off." "I don't need shiny, I need real." He nodded slowly. "Then here's real. I haven't had a vacation in 7 years. I fix cars, I raise Elodie, and I go to bed tired. That's my life." George's voice softened. "Do you ever want more?" "I used to," he said. "Now I just want what I have to last." She didn't respond, but something in her shoulders relaxed. After a moment, she stood. "I should check on the car." Hudson rose and followed her outside. The tow truck had already pulled into the lot, her compact luxury sedan hitched and looking even more out of place than she did. The driver gave Hudson a nod. "You want it at the shop?" "Yes, put it in Bay 3, I'll look it over." Georgia watched the car being hauled away. "Do you think you can fix it?" "We'll see, might take a few days to get parts." She turned to him. Then, I guess I'm not going anywhere. Guess not, he said, then paused. You could stay at the motel on Main Street. She crossed her arms. You want me to? He met her gaze. Would it be a bad thing if I didn't? She didn't answer. Instead, she walked back to the truck on her own, climbing in with quiet confidence. As they drove back toward the edge of town, Georgia rested her hand on the open window, letting the breeze catch her fingers. Hudson glanced at her profile. You said you called off the merger. I postponed it. Because of the storm. Because of Elodie's juice box, she said without looking at him. And the cold spaghetti. And the fact that for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I had to be anyone but myself. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Back at the house, Elodie was sitting cross-legged on the floor, cutting out paper stars with Mrs. Connors. She jumped up when Georgia walked in. I saved you one, she said, holding up a lopsided star. Georgia crouched down to take it. It's beautiful, is it magic? It only works if you make a wish, Elodie whispered. Georgia glanced at Hudson, then looked back at the star. I think I already did. 2 days later, the rain was a memory, and the sun cast golden light across the gravel drive as Hudson tightened the last bolt beneath Georgia's hood. The part had arrived that morning. He'd picked it up himself, not because he didn't trust the delivery man, but because he'd needed the quiet. Something about her presence, her voice, the way she looked at Elodie like she genuinely saw her was starting to sink beneath his skin. She hadn't mentioned leaving again, not since the drive back from the diner. But her car sat in his shop now, fully functional. He had no excuse left to keep her here. Georgia appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, her blouse rolled at the sleeves. She looked nothing like the woman who'd arrived in heels during a storm. There was dirt on her cuff, a faint sunburn across her neck, and her eyes were calmer somehow. Like she'd left something behind in that rain. You fixed it, she said. He stood, wiping his hands on a rag. Runs smoother than it probably ever did. She stepped closer, scanning his face. That means I can leave. Yeah, he said, and it came out gruffer than he meant. I should be in New York by tonight, she said, but didn't move. Hudson nodded once slowly. You could be. Behind her, Elodie's laugh rang out from the swing Hudson had built years ago, the one now hanging slightly crooked from the oak tree. Mrs. Connors pushed gently behind her, humming something out of tune. Georgia turned toward the sound, watching. She talks about you constantly, Georgia said, her voice low. Told me you built her a spaceship out of a broken refrigerator box last summer. Hudson shrugged. Only took 6 rolls of duct tape. She said it had a command center. Georgia's voice was soft now, with a snack drawer. Every pilot's gotta eat. Georgia looked at him a long moment, something unreadable in her eyes. I wasn't supposed to stay this long. I know. I'd tell you I'm grateful, but that feels too small a word. Then don't say anything, Hudson said. Just tell me what you're really thinking. She exhaled slowly, her gaze shifting from the car to the swing to the man in front of her. Haven't felt like this since before everything got so loud. What does it feel like? Like breathing, she said. Like I stopped holding my breath for the first time in years. He stepped toward her, close enough to see the gold flecks in her eyes. You've got a company to run, a life. I get it. I built that life, she said, brick by brick, but I don't know if I ever lived in it. Hudson didn't speak. He didn't need to. Georgia looked down at her hands, then back at him. I spent so long trying to prove I belonged at the table, I never stopped to ask if I wanted to sit there. And now. She drew in a breath. Now I want something that doesn't depend on quarterly numbers or shareholder moods. I want to wake up and know the world won't collapse if I don't check my email before breakfast. Hudson tilted his head. You think you can have that here? I don't know, she admitted, but I think I want to try. A breeze moved between them, stirring the hem of her shirt. When she reached for his hand, it wasn't tentative. It was certain. He took it without hesitation. I don't have much to offer, Hudson said. Just this town, my shop, and a little girl who already thinks you're magic. Georgia's eyes glistened. She's not wrong about the magic part, but it's not mine. It's this place, you, her. I think I just got lucky enough to stumble into it. A car horn honked in the distance, someone turning down the road, headed toward the center of town. Life moved on. But in that moment, neither of them moved. You could stay, Hudson said. I was hoping you'd ask. Later that evening, the backyard was strung with lights borrowed from Mrs. Connors and powered by a generator Hudson had dug out of his shed. The grill sizzled, laughter echoed, and Elodie danced barefoot in the grass, a paper crown on her head. Georgia stood at the edge of the porch, barefoot too, holding a lemonade Hudson had handed her with a sheepish, "It's not champagne, but it's cold." He came up beside her, brushing her shoulder with his. "You fit here," he said. "I didn't think I would," she whispered. "You didn't try to, that's why you do." Georgia turned to face him, her hand resting on his chest. "I don't want this to be a pause between meetings. I want this to be a meeting I never want to leave." Hudson leaned down, his forehead against hers. "You're not leaving, not unless you want to." "I don't." Their kiss was slow, certain, and in front of everyone, neighbors, Elodie, the whole town if they cared to look. But no one interrupted. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. Weeks later, Georgia accepted a new role not at the head of a boardroom table, but as the founder of a nonprofit aimed at helping small-town businesses stay afloat during corporate buyouts. She ran it from a desk in Hudson's living room, while Elodie colored beside her and Hudson tuned engines out back. The house got brighter. The porch got wider. And one Saturday, under that same oak tree, with paper lanterns strung like stars and Elodie tossing flower petals from a wicker basket, Georgia walked barefoot down the aisle in a dress simple enough to feel like her and beautiful enough to take Hudson's breath away. He waited for her with hands that had fixed engines and cradled a child through every scrape and heartbreak, hands that now held hers like they were home. When the ceremony ended, Elodie squeezed between them and grabbed both their hands. "You're stuck with us now," she announced. Georgia laughed, then kissed Hudson again before whispering, "Exactly where I want to be." And it was true. Storms might break the power, but sometimes they lit the path exactly where you needed to go. The first frost had come and gone, leaving a thin silver sheen on the fields just beyond the tree line. Inside Hudson's house, now their house, Georgia stood barefoot on the hardwood floor of the kitchen, flipping through a stack of paperwork that had arrived just after sunrise. The kettle hissed on the stove, and the scent of cinnamon from the apple muffins Elodie and Mrs. Connors had made the day before still lingered in the air. Hudson stepped in through the back door, brushing leaves from his jacket. "The new heat pump's working, should keep us warm through the winter." Georgia looked up, pen still in hand. "That's good. The grant proposal's ready. Once we mail it out, the community fund for the small shops downtown should be fully approved." She paused, then added, "I asked the town council to let you speak at the final vote next week." Hudson raised an eyebrow. "Me?" "They trust you, and they should hear from someone who's lived here his whole life. You're not just part of this town, Hudson, you're its backbone." He leaned against the counter, watching her. "You know, when you first showed up, I thought you were someone passing through. Then I realized you were running, and now I think you might have finally stopped." "I didn't stop," she said, setting the papers aside. "I landed." A knock sounded at the front door before she could say anything more. Hudson opened it to find a courier holding a flat box. Georgia took it without a word, her breath catching as she peeled back the brown paper. Inside was a framed article from a national business magazine. Her name was printed in bold beneath the headline, CEO Redefines Success, the woman who walked away from a billion-dollar merger to build something better. Hudson tilted his head. You didn't mention they were writing about you. I didn't know they were, she whispered. I gave one interview. I didn't expect them to care. They care, he said, because you did something no one expected. You chose people over profit. She looked down at the article again. I thought stepping away would mean disappearing, but it's like, now that I'm not shouting over everyone else, people finally hear me. Hudson reached for her hand. I've heard you the whole time. Later that afternoon, Elodie bounded through the door holding a construction paper invitation covered in glitter and stickers. It's for the harvest fair, she said, handing it to Georgia. Our class is doing a play and I'm the moon. Georgia crouched down. The moon. She glows and watches everyone, Elodie said proudly. She sees all the stories. Hudson glanced at Georgia as she stood again. You should see the fair. They go all out. Last year they had a pumpkin catapult that nearly took out a parked truck. Georgia smiled. Sounds like a liability nightmare. That's what makes it fun. As the day faded into evening, they walked into town together, the three of them. Elodie skipped ahead, her braids swinging as she sang something under her breath. Georgia tightened her coat against the breeze, her fingers brushing Hudson's. You know, she said, I thought I'd have to give up everything to find peace. Turns out I just needed to find the right place to build from. He glanced sideways at her. You planning on building more? A lot more, she said. The community center glowed with string lights as the fair buzzed around them. Hudson bought Elodie a caramel apple. Georgia negotiated with a vendor over hand-knit scarves. They didn't talk about what could have been anymore. They talked about what was next. That night, after Elodie had fallen asleep in a nest of blankets and stuffed animals, Georgia stood on the porch wrapped in a worn quilt. Hudson joined her, 2 mugs of tea in hand. I spoke to the board yesterday, she said softly. Told them I won't be coming back in any permanent capacity. I'll consult, guide, but my days of living out of a suitcase are over. He didn't say anything at first. Then, what made you sure? She turned to him. This. You're not going to miss the city. Maybe, but not like I'd miss this. Not like I'd miss you. He reached into the pocket of his flannel shirt and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught before he even opened it. I don't have a yacht, he said, or a private island. But I've got a backyard with a tire swing, a stubborn furnace that I know better than anyone, and a little girl who already calls you hers. Georgia opened the box slowly. A ring sat nestled inside, simple and elegant, a single sapphire in a silver setting. I want to marry you, Georgia, not because I need to, but because I can't imagine waking up without you anymore. She didn't look away. I've signed contracts worth millions, negotiated clauses that could turn a company inside out, but this is the easiest yes I've ever given. They kissed beneath the porch light, the night quiet around them. A month later, the town gathered again, this time not for a harvest fair or a fundraiser, but for the wedding. Georgia wore a dress stitched by the local seamstress, the fabric soft and light, her hair pinned with wildflowers gathered that morning by Elodie. Hudson wore his best button-down and boots polished to a shine. They married under the same oak tree where she'd once made a wish on a paper star. Elodie stood between them, holding both their hands. When the vows were spoken, she leaned in and whispered, "Now you're stuck with us forever." Georgia laughed through tears. That's the plan. They danced under lanterns. They ate pie instead of cake. And when the night ended, they didn't drive away in a limousine. They walked home, hand in hand, while Elodie fell asleep on Hudson's shoulders. The house was quiet. The future stretched out before them, not as something to conquer, but something to cherish. Georgia laid her head on his chest as they stood in the living room, the fire crackling softly. "Do you ever think about that night?" she whispered. "The storm, the cold spaghetti, the broken-down car." "Every day," he said, "it brought you to me." And that was the beginning of everything. They never needed more than each other. And they never looked back.